Okay, so welcome everybody who's joining us actually now and maybe in the future to our August meeting, in which we were thinking about some questions that Norman posed for us to frame our conversation. But I wonder, before we do that, are there any sort of updates, any new things to think about, any events that, I mean, that's one of the questions, but anything that's prompted us to do something differently as a headline?
Yeah, just before that, Melissa, perhaps acknowledge that Zara would like to have joined us, but has problems
Yeah.
connecting from Iran. So
Okay, I'm
yeah,
sorry. Yes.
but she sent a nice little reflective report, which I can read out here, and
Yeah,
we
that
can.
would be
Yeah.
good. Any headlines was really what I was asking.
None that we're not going to talk about, I think. I mean, we're all here. We are all
Okay,
healthy
that's
today.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Norman, you posed us some questions, and I think Jenny, you've
Mm.
framed them as prompts for us. Shall we go over to your?
If you want to share your screen, I've just got 4 slides. I can show you which was my attempt to answer each of the questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
let me see if I can
that would be really helpful. Thank you for doing that, Jenny.
make you host.
I think everybody saw the questions, so they're not a surprise to us, but it'd be really helpful to have you starting the thinking.
Okay.
Okay,
Right, so
Jenny, you're the host. Yeah.
okay, so I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay. Can you? Oh yes, it is still recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to start the slideshow if I can get. No. Right, can everyone see the screen now?
It's lovely, thank you.
Good. Okay, well, as I say, it was really my way of trying to take stock of what I have or haven't done, and I'm afraid I have to admit that I haven't been very active. You've previously seen that I had produced my statement of beliefs and values, so I then went back to that to try and identify which areas I ought to be trying to do something in, and clearly my lifelong interest has been in education. So I found that I naturally was targeting Section 4, Democracy, Nonviolence and Peace. What I was looking at was how my teaching and how any involvement in education actually contributes towards those objectives. Again, I found that really quite remote. So I fell back on looking at the SDGs, and clearly that immediately relates to number 4, quality of education. But indirectly, it also aims to achieve things like gender equality, reduce inequality in general across the different criteria, and also contribute, I hope, to good health and well-being, not just of those on the receiving end, but also of me as I'm teaching, and then altogether, overall, contributing to peace and justice and strong institutions. So that's the area I was focused on. Now, for the last 10 or 11 years at least, whatever it is since we left the University of Surrey, I've been involved in teaching at what I've called a Korean school. It's actually a small private enterprise in New Malden, where I've been tutoring mainly in English, but on other occasions in other subjects, other languages, and several examinations for citizenship, that sort of thing. But in the last few months, I've also taken on teaching in another school, which I've called the Tamil School. And what I wanted to do was look at what I'm doing in each area and see whether or not I'm making the same contribution. So what I'm doing in the Korean school is I'm teaching mostly bilingual children. They're of Korean, Chinese, Arabic, Eastern European origin. Most of them have been born and brought up here, but they are bilingual. But I do have some new migrants. So, for example, I've got some Vietnamese children at the moment for whom English is really their second language, and therefore we're concentrating on basic language skills. I'm teaching at the moment children from the ages of 4 to 18. On occasion, we'll get adults wanting citizenship preparation, so that's periodic, episodic. I have one-to-one classes of high ability children. At the moment, I've got someone who's working towards 11 plus because we're in a selective area here, and we have some very well respected selective schools that keep the prices of properties here very high. And also I've got some aiming at high levels of GCSE as well. I see them on a one-to-one basis. The others I see on, I have groups of mixed ability, but also mixed ages. So that's quite demanding. What I'm teaching is English language, creative writing, literature, verbal and non-verbal reading, and as I said, occasionally English for citizenship. Most of them are ultimately working towards exams, but I mean, we have a lot of children that we teach from the ages of maybe 5 up to 16, 17, and they even come back after that. So we do have children with long duration. They're working towards their SATs, also 11 plus 8 level GCSE. And then there are some who are not working necessarily towards an exam, but are with us, like the Vietnamese children, for example, just learning the basics of English to cope at school. The Tamil school is quite different. Oh, sorry, they're all face-to-face lessons. I don't do anything online for that school. The Tamil school, though, is quite different. Again, I'm teaching English language, literature, and creative writing. But this time, the ages, if I move us out of the way, you can see that ages 10 to 17 mainly. They're all second generation, either Tamil or Chinese. I got involved with them partly through my husband, who is a Tamil, as you know, and he plays badminton, and some of his group are Tamils as well. And through them, one of them happens to run this school, and that's how I got involved in it. Again, I'm teaching mainly towards exams, selective entrance exams and GCSE at the moment. I have some high achievers who are working ahead of, so for example, I've got year 6s working with year 9s, that sort of thing. So they're way ahead of their years. Some classes are face-to-face, but most of them are on Zoom. So what I found is interesting is that they are essentially teaching the same thing, but in very different ways. And so what I wanted to look at was my experience and what have I learnt through this process. If I move us out of the way again, just back here out of the way, what have I discovered? So the first thing is I'm reminded of the two-way benefits of teaching and the personal pluses. So I hope that the children have gained, but these are the things that I have gained through my involvement. So one of the things I've most enjoyed is having to reread. I studied foreign languages, so many of the literature texts that are used in O-level and GCSE and A-level here are books that I either haven't read or haven't read for many, many years. So I've had to revisit them, then produce my own teaching material. So that's something I have thoroughly enjoyed, and it's contributed to my well-being because I felt self-actualized through doing it. And seeing the children obviously responding has been great. I then had to familiarize myself with the online platform, and that was really complex. And at first I found it difficult, but having got to grips with it again, I've got some sense of self actualization through learning how to deal with it. On the academic side, what have I learned? I've been able to compare the benefits and shortcomings of both online and face-to-face teaching. Online, I've discovered that you have to be really thoroughly prepared. So I've produced lots of PowerPoints, made sure that I've got everything produced in PDF so that I can then share that on the platform with the children and they can use it for homeworks and so on. So you have to be much more thoroughly prepared than face to face. I've found it difficult to deal with the children online because you don't develop the same relationships. And my teaching has always been based on the assumption that if you have a good relationship with the children, then you can motivate them. And particularly, I don't want to be racist, but I do find that some of the Chinese children, for example, find it very difficult to relate, especially if it's online. Even I have one that I do teach face to face who is 16, and I've known for a few years, and only after this time is she beginning to open up to me. So I think there is a cultural issue there, and it seems to be exacerbated when it's online teaching. Also related to that, I don't have direct contact with the families, whereas in the Korean school, the families bring the children in, we chat informally, we exchange how progress and so on. So there's much more of a sense of being a human. And that leads me on to the next thing. I feel that there are very different academic and social roles when exams are the focal point. So in the Tamil school, passing the exams is the main thing. And that is very much a cultural issue with the Asian community. And I know that through my husband and his family. So I'm left with a question. Are the different cultures responsible for the difficulties I feel in my role? I think I've actually lost something here. No, I thought I had. Sorry, let me just go back. I feel that in the first role, I'm respected and I'm a person at the Korean school. Whereas at the Tamil school, I almost feel as if I'm hired staff and the parents expect me to jump and do whatever they think is appropriate. So, for example, I had one after the first lesson I had online with one child, the parents sent via the administrator a message. Are they going to learn grammar? Well, in fact, if she'd understood what I was doing, we'd done in the course of the hour online, we'd actually done comprehension, we'd looked at grammar, we'd looked at vocabulary, we'd looked at all these things. But I felt that I was being told that I hadn't done what I was expected to do. Is the different age of the students maybe a factor in my feeling different roles? Or is the stage of social integration relevant? The fact that in the Tamil school, all those children have been born and brought up here. So these are just questions that have been raised through my experience and put potentially areas I could research if I wanted to take it further. But then I had to look also at the at the Earth Charter, because that's what we're talking about. And I felt overall that the Earth Charter is far too remote for me to be able to do anything meaningful. As I showed on the first main slide, I had to fall back on the SDGs to identify what it was that I was trying to do and interpret whether I was being successful. So finally, the last slide is what has helped and hindered me. So I've looked at the hindrances first. So the first thing was that I was working 6 days a week. The only day that I had off leading up to exams was Thursday. And I deliberately kept that free because at that time, my husband was also off on he's not now because he's a doctor and he's working on contracts, and that because of the shortage of doctors, he's working full time at the moment. But I felt that I had an overload. And in addition to that, on the days or in the hours that I wasn't teaching, I was spending many, many hours just preparing materials, teaching materials. I found the lack of interpersonal relationships with the online learners difficult. And a major problem that I hadn't anticipated was that I had health issues, which made me then have to reevaluate. Do I want to spend my time, particularly as a pensioner, do I want to spend all my time teaching, or should I try and rationalize it and cut it down a bit? The things that helped me, though, on the other hand, were being able to use the materials I've produced, between two schools. And I know that once I produce them in future years, I'll be able to use them again. It helped that I was aware of the personal growth I was acquiring through learning and feeling I was developing new interests and knowledge. And then finally, what helped was having a very tolerant spouse who doesn't mind me being away, sitting for hours and hours on end writing and doing things like that. So that was just a quick summary of what I've been doing or haven't really been doing. In effect, I haven't done anything new. I've done more of what I was doing, and I hope that the impact I've been having has just been increased rather than static. So for what it's worth, that's my answer to the 4 questions. So,
well, thank you.
Okay.
What I'm struck by, Jenny, is life often emerging in unanticipated ways, which was one of the questions that Norman offered us.
Yeah.
And in a way, maybe this wasn't totally unanticipated. I'm sure you had a decision to make, but the amount of work you were doing and the contrasting experiences sort of have happened, and that has prompted this thinking that you've just unpacked for us.
Yes, I think that's very true. And I'm someone who finds it difficult to say no. And I did at some point begin to feel I was being exploited in the second school, in addition to, because they were desperate for an English teacher. They'd not had professional English teachers, they'd only had students before helping. They then wanted me to produce materials for other years as well. So it's all these little hidden things that creep in.
What about others? I had some other thoughts while Jenny was talking, but I'm sure we all did.
Can I ask, Jenny, when did you start these roles? Is it a recent thing, and did you start both kind of concurrently?
No, the Korean school I've been working at for at least 11 years or more now, and it varies. Sometimes some years I might be teaching 4 days, 4 evenings a week and a Saturday. At the moment, it's only twice a week, so it varies according to demand. The Tamil school I must have been involved with since about March, I think, of this year. So that was probably a conscious, although I wanted to help, I was aware that it would also be congruent with what I'd said I wanted to do in the project. And I haven't included anything else here, but my husband and I also we go to a lot of medical conference or psychiatrist conferences, and we do joint presentations there as well. And so we do teaching in other ways as well.
I suppose
sorry, Melissa.
Had you finished, Valerie, or was that?
No, I was just going to say on the back of that, what kind of struck me was probably tied into my own piece on reflection. I think context is key, and what I don't know you very well other than through online, but my sense is it's your commitment to the role that you do that creates a layer of that challenge that maybe somebody else could come in and be very clinical about their engagement and be very black and white about the beginning, middle and end. And I just think it's interesting, and broadly even in the sustainability piece, that most of us have come to this because of that thing of we care. What if I could make a difference? And I think what you're saying, what I'm hearing, Jenny, is a lot of it's a conflicting thing, because you're so passionate about it and want it to be successful, you tend to put more of yourself in it. And then in putting more of yourself in it, there's a kind of a cyclical thing that I think it's hard to separate. I think personally it's probably a good thing, but I hear what you're saying then in terms of that burnout piece, and sometimes that little bit where you get aggrieved because you're trying to do a really good job and really engage, and you've put yourself in that position. But yeah, it's a really complicated thing, I think, and the only way to deal with it sometimes is not to care. and then you couldn't do what you do. So yeah, it's a bit of a gerbil wheel just listening to what you're saying. So that's kind of just again more of the reflection from me.
I think that's interesting because it takes us back to the basic values underpinning everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Norman.
Yeah, no, there are many resonances there, Jenny, with what I'm trying to do, but in a very different context and very different focus for it. So I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't expecting that as you talked, especially at the end when you sort of brought together the benefits. And I love this idea of the two-way benefits, that you putting stuff in, putting yourself into it, as Valerie's just said, with huge commitment and passion and creativity, because you care about something. But the benefits then are coming back. The information flows back from you, from the people you're involved with, and that's how you get benefit, as well as ultimately the personal development, which is your investment in time and effort and doing things you haven't done before and learning through that process. So I think there's perhaps that whole area is like generic to whatever it is we're trying to do. And I think we touched on this in our last exploration, our last inquiry, where we focused on the idea of commitment. Where does it come from, and what motivates you to get involved? And it is these deep beliefs and values that you hold, in your case, all through your career, to make a difference to learners. And that's what drives you to the level where you are totally committed to something. And without that, you won't be committed, and probably things will fizzle out very quickly. So it seems to me that we've got to where we were in the last inquiry very quickly with just your example of trying to accomplish something, which is clearly not an easy thing to do, with lots of different cultural contexts, and all the communication issues that come from that, misunderstandings and so on. I mean, mine is in a sense not a cultural problem, although it is, but I'm working with local people who a lot of them are my sort of age, with my sort of backgrounds, and politics emerging. That's a big issue, and unless you can understand the politics of what's going on between different groups, you can't make much progress, no matter how much commitment you put in, how much enthusiasm. But by the same token, unless you model what it is you care about, you won't get any engagement from anybody else. They won't think you take it seriously, but they buy into things that you are willing to spend time doing, to go out of your way to talk to people, to try and get people involved. So it's that modeling process, I think, that I also see in yours, in your example, that by modeling what you do, not only to the students, but to the parents and the administrators involved as well, is what you're doing is more accepted by, if you like, that little ecosystem that you're working with. So I like many aspects of what you were saying, and I think there are lots of things there which are probably generic to all of us trying to do whatever it is we're trying to do.
And how much do you think, looking at your situation, Norman, it's important that they see results as well?
Yeah, well, I've always thought that the modeling, if you are trying to facilitate, teach, drive, whatever it is you're trying to make something happen, that one of the most important things you can give people is to show them that whatever they're doing is contributing to something bigger than themselves. So giving them an indication of what they have done has had, how the effects it's had on whatever it is you're trying to do. This is all very garbled to me, but it's really essential to reveal the results and to celebrate the results, and to say, right, now we've got that body of results, we can now go forward and build on and do something else. So I'll give you a very specific example. So mine, without telling you the whole story, has been about this idea of trying to create a biodiversity park across 4 parishes in my area. Mine, Betchworth, and then 2 other villages on either side of where I live, Brockham and Buckland, and then another neighbourhood, Box Hill. And so a lot of mine has been about trying to develop relationships with people that I didn't have before, not only individuals, but also organisations like parish councils and district councils, county council, environmental NGOs, and so on. So it to me it's become as complex and messy as any work process that I ever was involved in, with the politics being integral to that. So, for example, one parish always seeing itself in competition with another parish, and all the things that falls out of that. But a lot of things that you were saying, like the relationships are key, communication is clearly key, and you have to communicate in lots of different ways. But doing things together, groups of individuals, and hopefully on larger scales, and then showing the results. So one very specific example, the last few weeks has been in the UK, we have this something called a big butterfly count. And since our project is all focused on nature and biodiversity, this year had a really good go at trying to get as many people as possible involved in making counts. They're only only requires 15 minutes, but it requires downloading an app. It requires familiarizing yourself with butterflies. It probably requires you to do 2 or 3 goes before you actually get any results. Anyway, so you contribute to a national map, a database, but you can extract from that the data for your own area. So I had to learn how to do that. But in the end, we now have 174 counts for our area. And I don't know, we counted 2,500 butterflies or something, 27 species. So that's our database now. We've extracted it from the national database. So the last couple of days then, so that was going on for about 3 weeks. The last couple of days, I've done a couple of posts, a blog, with a report with all the stats in, and said this is how it compares to previous years and so on. And today just put a little butterfly mover together showing all the species that we've seen, and putting that back into we have a WhatsApp nature group forum, which is now 100 people, by the way. So that's grown since March from about 48, I think it was. So we've doubled it in the process, and now we've got people posting every day, and now the whole, I'm not necessarily posting in there, but other people are commenting on other people's posts. It's a really nice, healthy environment. But anyway, so giving them back the information that they have put into the national database as our database then. So it's always about rebranding as well, that you've done this and we've done it together, and now this is ours, and then from there we can now go to the next stage and do something more. So Jenny, just to answer your question, yes, it's absolutely showing what results mean in whatever context you're working, and getting people to contribute to those results is a really important part of any sort of change process at this scale.
Yes, thank you, Norman. How interesting that such different projects
connect and resonate with each other. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Is that because basically we share the same values?
Yeah, I mean, that has to be the starting point every time, because unless you've got your values and beliefs in place, you don't get the commitment and the energy to pursue things which are not easy and require a lot of time in order to achieve anything of any significance. So, I mean, we all did that in our work, I'm sure, when we were working, because we believed in what we were doing. We wouldn't have been doing the jobs we did. Sorry, Valerie, you're still doing your job. So, but for us three, it was very much that, wasn't it? We threw ourselves into it because we believe what we're doing and we're having a positive effect on the world around us. So at that level, we all have to be involved in the same way, I think, and that's where it starts. What we do beyond that is the context and the particular things we decided we want to put our time and effort into. But there's a cost, Jenny, and I think I heard that in your story as well, that the cost is this huge investment that we put in ourselves, and that cost has impact on families. And yeah, my wife is very understanding as well, but there are points where you are certainly abutting and interfering with other aspects of life, family life, for example, that and it's very uncomfortable and it's not always straightforward. You know, it's
requires negotiation. Yeah.
it can be very difficult. Yeah. That's the cost, or one of the costs.
I was interested in how much you emphasized, Jenny, the self-actualization and the personal growth side of things, because I was reflecting myself recently that one of the ways I used to get those kinds of things delivered to me, I gave up doing a long time ago. And I think I seek some of those feelings in other places now that I'm no longer doing that work. And that's quite hard to find. I mean, one of the things people say they can't wait to retire. But one of the things that goes with retiring from your career is all those obvious opportunities for all of that. And I have to find that somewhere else because it isn't readily there. And it was so readily there in my work. I mean, I do understand what you're talking about, Norman. There were lots of negative things as well. And one of you'll remember my garden I'm supposed to be working on with my children, which still continues to be my focus. Well, in the last 4 or 5 months, that garden became a building site and everything that had been done was obliterated. That's so much like my work. A change project that then gets sort of swept away by something. And I think because of the work that I did, I can stay still wanting the same things and see that as a setback, but not necessarily, well, and in fact, it has already proved to be not only a setback, but actually a huge leap forward, given that you may also remember that I was doing this work surreptitiously. I was kind of doing things with my grandchildren, not being very clear about what I was doing. My daughter actually asked me if I would be willing to take on a focus on their garden, which was actually her asking me to do what I was surreptitiously doing. So something that I was doing had actually been seen, whereas it didn't feel like that. It felt like the whole thing was disposable, which of course it had to be, and there was a good reason for this building site. But I think I seek being part of something bigger than myself as my self-actualization and personal growth. And this garden is it at the moment. Of course, it's not the garden, it's the bigger picture, but the garden is the vehicle for that. So that's my experience recently. And the other question that I had coming out of what you presented to us, Jenny, was you found the Earth Charter too remote. We used to also say that about the SDGs. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? That we find these big frameworks hard to take on board individually.
And maybe there's a question of time too, that we've become more familiar over the last few years with the SDGs. And I suppose with time we might become more familiar with the Charter. But I do feel that the opportunity to do something on the micro level relates better to the SDGs and to the Charter.
Yeah, I think I would see it as some of the big overarching principles. Like for me, it's ecological integrity as a shorthand way of expressing the idea that we're all connected and interdependent, and every life form is dependent on every other life form. So it's at the highest level that you can easily relate anything you do within that whole domain of activity. And that's all you need, in a sense, the headline. And then your interpretation is in your context and what you think will help meet that, what they use the term universal responsibility or universal duty in some way. And I think that's the way I've come to see it now. It is at the highest level that it makes sense to me to assimilate and be aligned to. Anything deeper than that, maybe it's just too micro. You keep it at the highest level, it works well.
I really liked your question, Valerie. What if I could make a difference? And I think we were talking about some things like that in previous meetings. Well, I think, was it Josephina, you said, does it matter if this doesn't work? You know, it doesn't, why would I not do it kind of thing? There was that kind of discussion going on. And I think what if I could make a difference is the very personal level. I really like that. That's a good reminder for me. That's what I'm trying to do, make a difference and give it a go. Do you use that yourself and what you do?
Yeah, and I suppose my own story is quite interesting in that I'm a post-primary teacher by profession, but because of my experiences both on secondment positions and through government, I was working in our Department of Foreign Affairs when the SDGs from Ireland were kind of in the midst of negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals, and I came back into education and couldn't see them anywhere. And I designed the program that I now use in schools. And just through a number of opportunities found that currently the Department of Education will fund me to share that with other schools. And sometimes I like that notion of, can one person, make an impact, and why it's back to kind of, I suppose, my piece. Why do I want to, and why do I care? And how do I support other people to care? Because again, I think what we've all spoken about is that, I suppose, that passion that you have, whether it's a big, strong 100-mile-an-hour passion or just a stealth, consistent, persistent passion. But it's knowing kind of in your gut that something is right, but also, I suppose, logically knowing that you can't keep traveling on your own. It's that interdependence. It's, how do I bring people with me? How do I spark something so that ultimately I can step back a little bit, not because I don't want to do what I do anymore, but because ultimately it can't survive if we keep doing this as a solo run. So, and it's interesting, Jenny, you spoke about going back to the SDGs. I find this in education a lot, that the dilemma of, I champion the SDGs as a framework for schools, not because I think they're the holy grail, but I find people need something to hang their hat on. And I will always say, and it can be a little bit difficult, but I will say, do whatever works for you. So this time it might be the art charter, but another time it might be a sustainability policy, or it might be something that's happening locally. And I'd be quite blunt. I don't care what you're doing, so long as you're doing it, so long as the thing that sparks the joy in you is the thing you hang your hat on. So I'm kind of inclined a little bit to agree with Norman, what you're saying. It doesn't matter the way in, so long as we get you in. And once we get you in, then we can figure out, are you the communicator? Are you the doer? Are you the small p politics person? And it needs all of those. We don't need 100 activists. You need a couple of counters. You need a couple of diggers. You need a couple of communicators. And I think that's probably what the thinking comes back to for me, is that, how do we do this in a way that we're not all trying to be the same, and that's really good. The bit we bring is really, really rich. But yeah, and then, when you look at what's going on in the world at the moment, and then you kind of go, right, okay, we need to take a breath, and that's really important as well. So that's kind of where a lot of my navel gazing is coming from. In action, it's probably, at the moment, I'm looking at, how do I transfer that in a way that's concrete for people, that they can find context for themselves. And a lot of it is about that communication piece you spoke about, Norman, that knowing your audience and knowing, well, you guys are really ahead of the game, so how do I motivate you? Or this group actually isn't started yet and they're overwhelmed, so how do I say the same thing but in a way that says, whatever step you take is okay. So there's really there is a deeper bit that sometimes systems thinking approach to say that we're connected, come at it, come in through whatever door you like, but just come in the door.
Thank you, Valerie. I think you were breaking up a little bit, but we got what you were talking about. I think that was just a bit of an interruption, but it caught up. So if you look at the recording, you'll see that.
Okay, no problem. So long as I didn't freeze with the funny face. How do we never freeze with the nice face?
Norman?
Listen, well, I've got a little two-pager from Zahra Bahrami, who,
Yes.
as I mentioned, has problems connecting with us from Iran. And I think it sort of fits very much the conversation we've been having. And I thought I'd just like to read a portion of it, if I may, and we can just reflect on our conversation that we've had and how this might resonate with some of the things that we pulled up. And I'm going to start it. So the title is My Efforts to Align My Life with My Beliefs and Values from the EC. And I think this is about a willingness, someone's passion to make a difference. She's a school teacher, a primary school teacher. So she says, in reflecting on the principles of the European Charter, Earth Charter, sorry, she says European, but we know it's the Earth Charter, I have chosen to focus on gender equality and social and economic justice. My decision stems from a deep personal connection to these issues, as I've encountered various challenges related to both of these throughout my life. Gender equality is a topic that resonates profoundly with me due to my own experiences and observations. I've witnessed firsthand the significant barriers that women often face in accessing education and employment opportunities. These obstacles are frequently rooted in entrenched societal norms and traditional beliefs that perpetuate the idea that women should not pursue higher education or professional careers. And she's particularly talking about it from her country's perspective. While progress has certainly been made over the years, particularly with the advent of the internet and technological advancements, which have opened new avenues for learning and connection, these barriers remain prevalent, especially in marginalized communities. I believe that fostering an environment where everyone, regardless of gender, can pursue their aspirations without fear or discrimination or limitation is essential for building a just and inclusive society. Ultimately, my commitment to these principles is driven by a desire to help create a world where gender equality and social justice are not just ideals, but realities for everyone. And she talks about now a very specific example. In the past year, while teaching first grade at an elementary school, I encountered a third grade girl named Elnaz, who struggled with basic reading and writing skills. Despite being promoted to a higher grade, she was unable to meet the necessary literacy requirements. This situation is not uncommon in rural schools, where some issues often lead to students being advanced without adequate preparation. Elnaz's parents lacked the financial means and motivation to seek private tutoring, which left her at risk of falling further behind, potentially leading to school dropout or early marriage, challenges that disproportionately affect girls. Recognizing the urgency of Elnaz's situation, I sought and obtained permission from the education organization, as well as consent from Elnaz and her parents, to enroll her in my first grade class. This decision was not merely an act of compassion, it was a strategic intervention aimed at providing her with the foundational skills necessary for future academic success. Elnaz's remarkable progress has been inspiring. Her enthusiasm for learning and her positive interactions with younger classmates have reinforced my belief in the importance of inclusivity in education. Witnessing her transformation motivated me to advocate for similar students who may be overlooked in the system. I shared Elnaz's story with my colleagues, emphasizing the need for collective action to support students facing similar challenges. So that's her attempt, I think, to make a difference, always starting with one, but then using that not only as a motivation for herself, but ultimately as a means of showing other people how by doing that you can have a bigger impact on more, scaling up, in other words, from one teacher's intervention. I thought that was a really good story and excellently written in English is not her first language.
Jenny?
I mean, I would introduce another word there, which I don't think is relevant perhaps for us in this country. Courage. I mean, requires an enormous amount of courage for her to be able to stand up for those principles in her country.
Definitely. and how stark the future for that young girl was, the implications of not keeping up and of failing and leaving, and her potential. You would worry about that in other countries, but that's a very stark future for her, that this has enabled her to make decisions about. Yeah. Yes, lovely example. Well, we've really listened to some stories this evening. I don't mean stories as in tall stories. I mean some really interesting personal stories of what we have been involved in and where we are currently. Let's hope that these stories are encouraging for other people who are going to look at this recording later, and might encourage them perhaps to send in their own experiences, because that would be a really useful thing, to have an array of experiences for as many of us as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right, Melissa. I mean, if anybody's got a story, anybody in our group, to tell, then please share it. It could be just it could just be a voice recording if you don't want to write it down, but make it as easy as possible and do whatever you can to keep those stories going, because we're all a bunch of stories at the end of the day, aren't we?
Yes, and that, I think, is what we've valued and enjoyed over the course of our inquiries, hearing such different stories from people from different parts of the world in different circumstances.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We're probably coming to the end now, aren't we? Are there any sort of final thoughts anybody wanted to offer in this intimate gathering?
I come back to my something we have discussed previously, which is, where do we go from here? Are we losing momentum?
Well, I think that's a question we should ask the whole group. I think we should explain that at this meeting we only had 4 people, and is there a sense that this inquiry, it maybe is not worth pursuing further, or if you are pursuing it, let's have some stories, do it in that sort of way, and we'll see where that takes us.
Yes, I think we have to bear in mind that this time of year may be a time that people can't commit to meetings and may be less available, and we shouldn't interpret this as a lack of interest in case it isn't. And then if there is a very limited number of people, it's considering whether or not we who still want to stay engaged, how we go forward. Yeah.
So we'll put an email around with the link to the video recording, and just put that out there and see what sort of response we get.
Yes, and people will see from the variety of stories that we've glimpsed this evening that there are very different things going on.
There are, and there's lots of learning and personal development, as we've all indicated. It's there's an emergent world out there that we're all encountering in our own ways, and it's all relevant. It's all relevant.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions this evening, and an interesting discussion. And I hope the boxing proves rewarding.
Fingers crossed, gold medal.
And thank you, Melissa, as well, as usual, for your lovely way of steering us through a conversation. Thank you very much.
So you're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
bye.
evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.